All right, you guys, we are live. I know it's been a long time. A lot of you guys have been requesting just live stream again. Please do it. Oh my gosh. And it's like, I've been pretty focused on the videos on this channel and trying to get them out there. But I figured, between now and the election, we'll just start doing this. We'll kind of do a state of the election live stream and, of course, talk about some news every week. And, maybe eventually we bring back the live show fully. I know that's what some of you guys, some of the OGs from like last year and before really want on this channel. So let's do this, okay? And I figure no better way to start off of something that might be good for like a live discussion on a stream than addressing the current state of the Trump campaign and where we actually are, right? Because there's kind of like two sides of this. There's the side that is completely panicking. They're completely freaking out. They're saying, we're screwed in this election, guys. The Trump campaign is a mess, running around like headless chickens. On the other side, you have people saying, everything is fine, like calm down, all the polls are fake. And I figure it might be a useful discussion to sort of weigh in on this and kind of reach a verdict, I guess, of what the truth really is, right? Like, where are we actually in this election? Should Trump supporters be freaking out? Is it fine? Are the polls fake? Is Kamala Harris really surging? I want to get all into that today in this live stream. And like I said, if this does well, if you guys enjoy it, maybe we'll do streams like this once or twice a week or so. So that said, folks, if you enjoy the content, if you're enjoying this stream, I guess it hasn't really started yet, but if you assume you are going to enjoy this stream, leave a like on the video, folks. Subscribe if you are new. And of course, I will read super chats periodically throughout. So I know we got a member chat right now. Dollar for Dollar sends a member chat saying, I got my pilot's license. You're next, bucko. Listen, Dollar for Dollar, good to see you again, man. We're focused on winning the election, okay? If we win the election, yippee-doo, then maybe I'll go get a pilot's license or learn how to fly. I do want to do that. I also have to learn how to drive manual, so that's another thing on my bucket list. But life is busy right now, clearly because of this election. So that said, folks, again, let me know if you guys enjoy this sort of live format, but let's just get right into this, right? Because I think obviously there is some degree of concern right now around the Trump campaign. We see the current polls. Kamala Harris is winning in most of them. And people are saying, what happened to Trump's lead from a month ago when it was against Biden? We're screwed. We need to replace the candidate. We need to fire all the campaign advisors, all this stuff. So look, the first thing I want to say on this front, and I have like a long list of sort of every talking point I want to address here. We'll talk about the polls. We'll talk about the ground game in terms of the Trump campaign, the ads, whether or not that's being conducted correctly, the rallies, Butler, PA, all this different stuff. But I want to start by just pointing this out before we get into this discussion on the state of the Trump campaign is I think what's undeniable is this. Whether you're on the side that everything is fine and Trump needs to just keep, doing the things the way he's doing, or you think that the house is burning down, I think what we can first of all agree on is that this is undeniably probably going to be a close election, and none of us should take anything for granted, right? And so the question of should we be concerned about the current state of the Trump campaign? Well, of course we should be concerned, right? Because it's a close election, right? If you're talking about an election that's going to come down to a couple 10,000 votes in a couple different swing states, yes, every vote's going to matter, and it's going to come down to the wire, and absolutely we should be concerned. But I think there's a difference between being concerned and panicking, right? And that is something I would highly advise against, which is panicking, because think about this just as a realistic life situation. Do you ever really work well when you're panicked, right? Concern, maybe nervous energy. Hey, never staying complacent. That's one thing. At the same time, I would advise everyone not to panic. And furthermore, I will explain in this stream why I actually don't think there are reasons to panic. There are reasons to be concerned. Of course there should be, by the way. They just changed out the candidate like 3 weeks ago. Yes, this is a much more dramatic campaign. We got to deal with a lot of different stuff, but that's different from being panicked. It's going to be a close election, like I said, but at the same time, that doesn't mean we need to freak out all of a sudden, okay? So that's number one. Now, that said, second thing I will say before I get into actually like discussing where I think the Trump campaign actually lies is to secondly point out that the internet is not real life. And why do I say this? There's actually a key reason I'm saying this is because, what you see let's say on Twitter, of people freaking out, you know, the doomer crowd, whoever they are, talking about the state of the Trump campaign, doesn't mean we're actually in trouble, nor does people on the internet saying everything is fine actually mean everything is fine, right? And a prime example I see of this is I've been meaning to do this stream for about the past week or so because I want to address, you know, maybe the concerns, maybe some of the chatter, but I saw very dramatically on Twitter yesterday how the energy shifted, and from Sunday to Monday, literally. And that was only because of one thing, which is Trump came back to Twitter and he did the space with Elon Musk. And then suddenly overnight, all of conservative Twitter basically goes from it's so over, oh my gosh, everything's done, to we are so back. And I point that out to sort of call out that, you know, the election did not magically change, right? Whatever the state of the election really is, it didn't magically flip from whatever it was on Sunday night to Monday night, right? Like, it didn't, like, yes, him coming back to Twitter might help with some votes and something he should do, sure. Doesn't mean the election changed. So that's all to say that the vibes you're seeing on the internet do not translate to the vibes you're seeing in real life. That's a mistake I would argue in many ways the Kamala Harris campaign has made. It's not a mistake that the Trump campaign should make. So that said, let's get into this. Let's get into this stream, and I'll talk about sort of addressing all of the major concerns. I've written a bunch of them down right here that I've heard from people over the Trump campaign, whether they're true or not, and kind of what the reality is, okay, on that front. So I see Texas Legend in chat says to relax. I don't think we should relax, guys. Let me make that clear. I understand what you're saying with that. I don't think we should be relaxed, right? We should be concerned, but we shouldn't be panicking, right? Be confident, yes, that we still have what it takes to win, but also don't release. But, you know, you understand what I'm saying there. Okay, so obviously we could start with the elephant in the room here, which is the polls, right? You know, this is, of course, the first thing everyone's going to point to. Maybe we should start the stream with it, but I'm actually going to do that last because it's like the hardest and most complicated to break down, so I have plenty to say about it, but we'll get to the polls last. I do want to start here, though, with this concern I haven't really heard in the past week, but 2 weeks ago, I was hearing all over the place, which is the talking point from the people, again, freaking out here, that say Trump has no ground game. This is something I've heard, right? So I saw this tweet go viral the other day that says Trump has no field offices, and a lot of people are saying there's no ground game. You know, they're not reaching voters in real life. So here's what I will first of all say. If it is true that Trump has no ground game, yes, that is highly concerning. If it is true, we'll go into whether or not it's true in a second. But yes, I would argue, because of especially the way in which elections work now and the way in which Kamala Harris has energized her base, that absolutely turnout is going to decide this election, and ground game is going to be everything, right? We need to be spending all the resources we have available, ballot chasing, making sure our people show up to the polls, et cetera, et cetera. But I've heard opposing things on this, right? On the Trump ground game. I've heard from some people that there's absolutely no ground game. And then I've heard other people say it's a way better and more organized ground game than it was in 2020 or 2016. Turning point action is helping a lot to go around and chase ballots in the swing states. And there's nothing to worry about. So, you know, the truth is, folks, that I do not work on the Trump campaign. I have no idea what the actual truth is. But what I can point to in an objective thing where we can analyze whether or not Trump's ground game is good or not is by looking at the voter registration numbers, right? Because that's the whole point of ground game is, first of all, are you registering new voters for your party, again, on the ground? And secondly, are you getting them to turn out to the ballot box? Obviously, the second part, we're not going to know till November 5th. But in the meantime, what I can tell you is this, and this is collected data from Michael Prusser over at Decision Desk, if you're curious on the source here. And this is the voter registration data from July to August, right? So in the past month on the states that report new voter registration by party, right? So not every state does it. For instance, Wisconsin does not report this by party, so we don't know how many new Republicans are registering versus new Democrats. But of the states, we can see what we are finding. And again, to address the talking point that Trump has no ground game, that Republicans are destroying the Democrats in terms of new voter registration. I'll read you here some of these numbers. So again, since July 2024 to August, in the state of Arizona, for instance, Republicans gained 19,984 new registered voters for the Republican Party. Democrats only gained 3,491. Okay, so that's the state of Arizona. In the state of Nevada, Republicans gained 948 new registered voters. Democrats gained 284. And in the state of Pennsylvania, which we know is going to be very key, very close, it's like the everything of this election, Republicans there gained 21,325 new voters. Democrats only gained 5,788. So again, addressing the talking point of Trump has no ground game. I don't know the truth in terms of what the campaign is actually doing, right? Nobody really knows unless you work for the Trump campaign, you'd like to share or something. I don't know if that violates NDA or privacy or whatever. But what I can look at is, and by the way, a lot of third parties like Turning Point Action and Scott Pressler and all these people are doing this for the RNC and Trump. So just because you outsource something doesn't mean that the end result is not still the same. But what I do see is in the 3 swing states we know of that do publicly report party registration by new voters, Republicans are destroying Democrats in all of these swing states on this front. And if you're curious here, nationally, in the month of July, so this is all, the 50 states that do report this data, the Republican Party nationally, past 30 days, gained 252,794 new registered voters nationwide. Democrats lost, minus here, 19,088, right? So again, I don't know if Trump really has no ground game or not, or if the campaign is as focused as it should be on, chasing ballots, going on the ground. And by the way, I absolutely agree. I think that's what's going to decide this election is turnout. Turnout is everything. I'm not downplaying this. It is completely possible, maybe, that the Trump campaign is not working as hard at this as they should. Again, I don't know. It's possible. I don't have on the ground numbers on that. And I also know that these voter registration numbers certainly undeniably could be better, but the objective fact that we know is everywhere that is reporting, the Republicans right now, in terms of new voter registrations, which does suggest at the very least it may be a product of the ground game. Again, Arizona killing them, Nevada killing them, PA killing them, nationwide wiping the floor, although that doesn't really matter. We care about the swing states, right? So that is number one on the ground game front. Again, could they be better? Yes. Arizona, we gained 19,000. Why can't that be 30,000? Why can't that be 40,000? Obviously, there's always room to improve. PA, 21,000. Why don't you make that 30? Nevada, we did beat the Democrats, but maybe not by enough. So this is all to say, obviously, there's room for improvement. But this idea that the Republicans just have no ground game and, Democrats are going to do the ballot chasing thing and, achieve that way better than us like they did in 2020, I don't see the evidence of that so far. Like I said, we'll just have to see. So this is, again, to go back, I guess, to the central point I'm going to make in this stream, which is room for concern. Yes, we should be doing better. Yes, that is true. But the idea that, like, the Trump campaign is sitting around doing nothing, well, by voter registration numbers, I don't necessarily see the evidence of that, right? So, that is number one. Let's move on here to a second talking point. But by the way, guys, if you're enjoying the stream, be sure to leave a like on the stream. We're at 153 live viewers and 38 likes. So let's get the stream at least to 100 likes. And of course, folks, if you got thoughts on all of this, you'd like to support the content here, feel free to do so via... Oh, shoot. Okay, my audio is still working. My interface just dropped on the ground there, but if the stream's still working, then fine. We'll pick it up later, okay? But yeah, folks, okay. Hold on, really quickly. Let me just log into the Super Chat interface so I can actually see it. Because, and again, folks, if you would like to support the stream, feel free to do so via the Super Chats. And in a second here, I want to move on to the talking point of, is Trump running enough ads, and is he running the right kind of ads? So we'll get to that in a second. Okay, again, be sure to leave a like on the stream. Okay, talking point number 2 I kind of have laid out here has to do with political advertising, right? This idea of, is Kamala Harris buying way more ads than Trump, and is she spamming the airwaves way better than him? So let's break that down, right? First of all, I will say, of the Trump campaign ads that he has released, that the campaign has released, first thing I notice is that the messaging is completely on point, right? There's no wasted time over kind of stupid or silly talking points. It is entirely hammering home Kamala, mainly over immigration, some over crime, some over the economy, but that's about it, right? So we're not seeing like any evidence, at least from the messaging standpoint, that, you know, it's way off or they just don't understand what they're running against in this election. I think from the ads we've seen, from what we've ran publicly and reacted to on this YouTube channel, I think on that front, it is largely, you know, pretty solid. They understand that the way you win this election is going to be by painting Kamala Harris as a far left radical, you know, on the issues, right, and stick to those issues. And messaging wise, substance wise, I think the ads are very good. If someone disputes that, feel free to let me know, but I think the ads content wise have been good. Now, that said, I think the debate here is over resources, and the concern I've heard from some people is that Trump's not buying any ads. Like, all the ads I see on my TV are Kamala Harris ads, or I watched your YouTube video and they were only airing Kamala ads on the thing. So here's what I would point out is, first and foremost, I think it's a known fact, it's always been like this, but especially in this election, that Kamala Harris is buying more national ads than Donald Trump is, okay? So if you live in California or you live in Alabama even, right, you know, you're probably going to see more Kamala Harris ads just because she's airing national ones, and the Trump ad strategy is way more focused on the swing states and the swing voters, which I think, you know, is probably a smart thing to do. We understand this election's not going to be won by the popular vote. The election is won by the battleground states. And so if Trump is more focused there, I don't see the issue. Should he maybe also run national ads just to have a presence? Sure, but that's also kind of nitpicking. But let's get specifically into, I guess, the numbers here, because, you know, it is true, right, that in the past couple of weeks, we've seen a little bit of a silence, a little bit of a break from the Trump campaign. I'll talk about that more when I talk about the rallies and whether or not he should be doing those and how many. But first of all, just want to point out here that it was announced today that one of the Trump super PACs just booked in like 95 million, I believe. $95 million worth of ad spending for Trump. So, you know, the idea, oh, he has, it's so funny how they say this, like the right-wing doomers, the people panicking, they always say, he's not doing this. And then a day later they do it. So it's like, again, internet's not real life. Maybe you guys should relax a little bit, not relax to get complacent, but just like not freak out. But here are some interesting numbers for you to see, because again, you know, I don't think that necessarily, if you don't live in a swing state, or if you're just watching on YouTube, especially if you're Gen Z, that the ads that you see on your stuff reflects what is shown nationally. So the data that we do have is that up until August 12th, which is, I believe, yesterday, right? Here are the numbers on how much each campaign has been spending in advertising on the airwaves. Okay, excuse me on there, folks. Okay, so in the state of Pennsylvania, Trump has spent $20.8 million on ads up until August 12th. Kamala Harris has spent 20.5. So technically, Trump has actually bought more ads in Pennsylvania than Kamala Harris has, or slash Joe Biden, I should say, so far. Although, okay, fair enough, it's about the same. In Michigan, the Democrats are beating us there. That is true. Trump has spent $7.3 million worth of ads. Kamala Harris has spent 10.2. I think that is also a state in Michigan that Kamala thinks she has maybe the best chance of those three Rust Belt states. So that makes sense. But again, it's not like, oh, we're not spending anything on the airwaves. In the state of Georgia, Trump has spent $10.4 million in TV ads. Kamala Harris has spent only $6.6 million. So we are beating them in the state of Georgia. In the state of Wisconsin, I believe I have these numbers correct here. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if I wrote this correctly, but according to my notes, Trump spent $8.2 million so far. Kamala Harris spent $6.3. Those may be flipped. I'm not exactly sure. But what I do know is that in Arizona, Trump has now spent $7.5 million. Kamala Harris has spent $3.4 million. Okay, so some perspective sometimes is important, right? Am I concerned maybe we're not spending enough on the airwaves? I guess, yeah, sure. Like I said, it's kind of been documented so far that Trump is trying to wait until after the DNC to really get into this stuff. And we'll talk about that strategy in a second when I talk about the rallies and all that. But, you know, is there necessarily room to panic over the TV ad buys? Not necessarily, right? After the DNC, but especially after Labor Day, it's kind of a known fact. That's when the election really starts to ramp up. And so see what the ad buying is like then, and then we can have that discussion over, is Kamala Harris destroying us on the airwaves, right? maybe that's something arguably important to consider. Other people have pointed out, well, Kamala Harris has a bunch of ad buys booked until the election, but Trump doesn't have that many. But people later fact-checked it and said, well, no, that's just because the Trump campaign prefers to book ad buys the week of, whereas Kamala Harris and Biden before that preferred to book them way in advance. It doesn't really make a difference, so that's kind of a hard metric to use. But anyways, that's just the point on the TV advertising. I mean, some states, yes, they are spending more than us so far. They do have more booked than we do until November. But like I said, kind of misleading when you consider that the Trump strategy is to book, before, like the week before, not a whole month or several months before. So, that, I think, too early to tell, but I don't see serious grounds for concern there. I think, like I said, Kamala Harris just became the nominee. Of course, she's going to be spamming the TV so that way she can get her name recognition and her awareness out there. Trump, on the other hand, the strategy is wait till after the DNC, wait till after Labor Day. Maybe you shouldn't do that, right? Maybe you got to start campaigning now. We'll address that in a second. But is it serious, like house is burning down, grounds for concern? I'm not exactly sure, folks, if that is true. All right. Sorry. Have to hydrate here biologically. But anyways, we got a super chat. Total Thunder, thank you very much for the super chat. Again, folks, if you would like to support, if you got thoughts on all of this, feel free to do so in the live chat or on the Streamlabs link that I have posted there. But anyways, let's see what's going on. I mean, you got one person here, for instance, saying Cope DAO. It's like, yeah, this is, of course, the talking point that everyone's going to use when, you're reading off statistics, right? You're reading off like, the voter registration advantage that Republicans are winning in. You're reading off the ad buys. If you refuse to say that the Trump campaign is entirely on fire and we need to be running around and panicking and like we're going to lose, then apparently that's coping, but it's not coping to do the opposite, right? To completely panic and like go crazy. That's not dooming. That's not panicking. But, just pointing out, well, people on the internet are saying the Trump campaign's not doing well and they're not doing anything and they're not like competent. But I'm reading the numbers here and that kind of suggests that might not be true. Of course, they're going to say we're coping. But you know what? At the end of the day, I think what you're dealing with largely in a lot of situations is demoralization agents, right? There's a lot of bad faith actors out there that either they supported DeSantis in the primary or they're anti-Trump in some cases, or they're literally just straight up Democrats, like whatever it is, just trying to spread these things. And like I said at the beginning of this stream, it's not me saying that, oh my gosh, relax, we got the election won by a landslide. It's simply me saying you should be concerned. Yes, this is a close election. I'm going to say that time and time again. You got to vote. You got to turn out voters, all this stuff. But at the same time, should we be completely panicking and acting like everything's been burnt to the ground and it's over? That's also not a productive mindset to have. Ultimately, I think in many ways, the easiest opponent to defeat is a demoralized one, right? And that's something that is actually well documented in the history of American politics. A lot of people think, oh, well, if you believe that you're losing, then a bunch of people are going to turn out to vote for you. But that's actually not really true, right? If you're completely demoralized, if people just have no reason to even go to the polls because they think they're going to lose either way, history shows us those candidates have not really done all that well. And so I'm just saying, yeah, you should be concerned. You should be like kind of healthy level of nervousness. Of course, it's a close election, but the idea I'm concluding so far that everything is on fire, I'm not necessarily buying that at the current moment. Okay. But anyways, on to our next sort of talking points here. Let's address the idea that Trump is not doing campaign rallies. And this is like a major concern a lot of people have. Why won't Trump do rallies? Now, the first thing I will say is the strategy that Trump has sort of laid out so far has been he's not going to really hit the campaign trail hard until after the DNC, until after the Democrats do their convention. Now, that said, the logic there is what? The logic there is essentially do what you kind of did for Biden after the debate, right? Which is kind of sit around, let Kamala Harris and Tim Walz sort of destroy themselves. Don't be too much in the spotlight. And then like after the DNC, you can start to really hit the trail hard. Now, the thing I will point out, and maybe this is the fairest talking point of them all, is I really do think that is a gamble, right? That is not something that is guaranteed to work, because if between now and the DNC, or maybe even slightly after the DNC, if Kamala Harris massively screws up, if she says something really stupid, or she implodes in the polls, or whatever it is, then you can stand around and say Trump was a genius for that, right? For a genius for just letting Kamala Harris do her thing. And, you know, I would also point out there have been many times in the past that Trump had ideas at the time that people thought were stupid, and then like 2 weeks later, everyone realized it was genius. So that may be true, but I will also point out it is a gamble, because if that doesn't happen, if Kamala Harris does not collapse between now and a little after the DNC, then yes, indeed, you did really just make a huge mistake, because you know, Kamala Harris spent all this time putting herself out there, and what were you doing? You weren't really campaigning. You weren't really hitting the trail all that hard. So it definitely is a gamble, okay? And to be totally honest with you, if it were me, right, if I were Donald Trump, this is not the strategy I would necessarily be doing. I would probably say hit the campaign trail as hard as possible, so that way Kamala Harris does not have a chance to define herself. Instead, you define Kamala Harris for everyone. So again, not necessarily my strategy that I would use. Okay, so I guess I will say maybe in that regard, I'm a little critical of that on Trump's part, but at the same time, you know, time will tell who's actually right or wrong. Right? Because again, if Kamala Harris really screws up at the DNC or slightly before that, or her approval rating all of a sudden just takes a nosedive, then Trump would be right. And I'd be humble enough to stand here and say that I was wrong, right? That, hey, okay, Trump made us all look stupid. He knew what he was doing. I mean, you know, to some degree, you also got to point out he just took a bullet about a month ago. Okay, so forgive him maybe a little for the slow rally schedule. Who knows if Secret Service is even really allowing him to do a lot of rallies until they get the security situation under control. So, you know, those are all things maybe to consider here a little bit. But okay, yeah, should Trump be doing more rallies? I suppose. But that said, if the strategy works out, then it works out. If not, you know, I don't know. But, you know, all of that in mind to consider. It seems like the strategy there has changed a little bit, because it was just announced a few days ago. This week, tomorrow, Trump will be doing a campaign event in North Carolina. And on Saturday, he will be doing a rally in Pennsylvania. So there you go. He's done two events this week. He's campaigning, right? People said he's not doing any campaign rallies until after the DNC. Well, whether or not that was true, it has apparently changed, because there you go. You just got the announcement of 2 this week. So I think that is actually a good thing. Personally, for me, I think that Trump rallies are going to be very important in this election, not necessarily for national purposes, not in the sense that, oh, everyone's going to watch them, but in the sense that, like I said, turnout is going to be very important. Turnout obviously is going to be everything. And I think what kind of happens when you do a campaign event in someone's area is the people in that area, regardless of whether or not they actually went to the rally, because of the fact that you sort of visited, hey, there's buzz, there's a little more energy. Hey, people remember, oh, you were there, you know, you were in town. So they're thinking about you a little more, right? So I do think rallies are going to be important. I hope that Trump certainly picks up with them. But again, like I said, we could be wrong, right? Because again, if Kamala Harris screws up in the coming 2 to 3 weeks, then the Trump strategy of sort of sitting on the sidelines may have actually worked. Or who knows, maybe Kamala Harris burns all of her campaign resources in the next few weeks because she's so aggressive. And then later down the stretch, it is Trump who is outworking Kamala. It is Trump who is outspending Kamala at the time that it actually matters. I don't know. Again, these are just a few things here, folks, to consider before we all start running around like headless chickens. That said, next thing we want to move on here to is the talk over the Trump assassination attempt. And, you know, this is something that I don't know if people really have been using this as a criticism of the Trump campaign per se, but it's maybe more so of a concern, which is that, look, politically speaking, you know, when Trump raised his fist with the blood streaming down his face in Butler, PA, that was like a big moment. Like, that was the moment it seemed like he was just going to win the election. But then in the span of about exactly a month, and yes, it is actually exactly 1 month since that happened in Butler, the American people have completely forgotten about it. It's been completely memory hold. And that's a valid concern, and it's not something that we certainly should be memory holding. But with that in mind, okay, and maybe some people are criticizing Trump because they're saying he should be talking about it more. He should be bringing it up more. Well, one piece of news I think I want to share with everyone is that Trump is scheduling, he is planning a return rally to Butler, Pennsylvania before the election. And you may be asking the question, when? Why doesn't he do it right now? I mean, he's got to do it. He's got to get the American people to remember about this. Well, folks, he announced this recently a couple different times. The return rally to Butler, PA is scheduled for October, right before the election. See what's going on there, folks? See maybe what is behind the thinking there? You're kind of reading into that, right? What the strategy is going to be, apparently, is that, if you're concerned that, hey, that assassination attempt, that should have helped him so much, politically speaking, of course, objectively, it's a great tragedy, but politically speaking, it should have helped him so much, but it's been memory hold. Well, it's going to be remembered about at the exact right time. Right. So that actually shows me, hey, Trump is thinking about this arguably in a very wise, strategic manner, because him going to Butler, PA is going to be his final case. Right. It is going to be essentially his closing argument to the American people. And when I heard that news, I thought to myself, that could make the difference, right? It really could in a state, especially in the state of Pennsylvania where it happened, that being your closing case, the final thoughts essentially of the American people going into this election are that image of, him raising the fist saying fight, fight, fight. Hey, just something to consider. All right, we're now on to almost the last part of this discussion, which is the polls, which we obviously are going to have a lot to say about. Should we be concerned? What are they really saying? But first, I do know we got some super chats, so let me read those here really, really quickly. So, Mockingbird for 20 SGD. I'm not sure exactly what currency that is, but for 20, thank you very much, says, Trump campaign is doing so many more rallies, interviews across media platforms and outlets than the Harris campaign. Trump has raised the bar so high for their own campaign that we self-critique ourselves. Thank you for the 20. Unreasonably, you should say. Thank you for the 20. So a lot of that is true, right? You can talk about Trump's lack of presence, but it's also true that Kamala Harris has not done a single media interview. Now, that said, maybe Kamala recognizes that she doesn't really have to because the media is campaigning for her, right? So she doesn't need to. They're spending 24 hours, 7 days a week glazing her, celebrating her, so that is whatever. On the front of the campaign rallies, that is a true talking point from Kamala Harris, which is like, in the past 2 weeks, yes, Kamala has done a few more rallies than Trump, but that's in the past few weeks, right? Assuming that Trump picks up the schedule, you may be at the end of the year where, Trump is doing way more than Kamala, so we'll have to see on that front. And yes, it is true. This year so far in total, Trump has done way more rallies than Biden and Kamala combined definitely did. So thank you for the 20 SGD. And look, I do think that self-criticism is certainly healthy to a certain degree. Obviously, there's no denying that we're in a tough place right now in the election, given that, a month ago, it seemed destined we were going to win by a landslide. They switch out the candidate, all this stuff happens. Yes, we should undeniably be concerned, but I will reiterate, there's a difference between being concerned and completely freaking out and pulling your hair out. And so I guess that's the point I want to make here and give people some reassurance, right? Now, keep in mind, like I said, none of this is definite reassurance. When I read off of the voter registration numbers, yes, we're beating the Democrats, but these numbers don't guarantee we win the election. Ad buys, we're matching the Democrats, but that doesn't guarantee we win the election. And as for the rally front, I even brought up, hey, maybe he should actually do more. Maybe that talking point is completely true. So, none of this is guaranteed, right? But I think that also goes both ways, which also says, well, if we're not in the spot we want to be right now, maybe instead of panicking, we should get to work, right? We should get to work. So here we go. Dollar for $2. Thank you very much. Says, how should the GOP counter the DNC coverage? Well, thank you for the $2, dollar for dollar. I think the best way overall would be for us to run on all of the major televised broadcasts of the DNC. Let's all run campaign ads that are exposing Kamala Harris for the radical that she really is, right? Hit her home on immigration. Hit her home on the crazy things she said in 2020 about healthcare, about how she said we should outlaw private health insurance, crime, she supported defunding the police. She supported bailing out the BLM rioters, et cetera, et cetera. There's plenty of other things. Talk about her crazy plans on the economy, expose the lie in terms of no tax on tips, all this stuff, whatever it is, point all of that out, and of course talk about how Bidenomics is tied to her, but run all those campaign ads all over the DNC. I think that's the best thing to do. Some people have suggested that maybe you should do a counter convention, right? You should have Trump do a speech during it, all of that. I think the only issue with that, folks, is going to be that while the base might like that, while the base might say, haha, that's awesome, inevitably, the national convention of the party is probably going to get more viewership. And so, all they're going to say is like, oh, look, the Republicans did their clown counter event and then we got more views or something. So I don't think necessarily doing a live event during their convention is the best move. Maybe do one right after or something, or right before, which Trump, by the way, the rally in Pennsylvania is this Saturday, so it's going to be right before the DNC. But I think really running our campaign ads on TV during their convention, that arguably is probably the best way to go about this. I think that's probably, in many ways, pretty genius. So that said, folks, again, if you would like to support the stream, feel free to do so via the super chats. But all right, now for the moment, right, that you were all waiting for, which is the polls, right? What do we think of the polls? Right now, they show Kamala Harris winning. Some of them, mainly from very left-wing sources, but some of them have Kamala Harris like +6, +7 nationally. What should we say about this? What should we do about this? Where does the truth really lie? So let's get into that, right? Let's get into that. So I'm not here, here's the thing, obviously, is anytime, so let me establish this right away, because you're going to get people saying this. Anytime that you say that maybe poll numbers might be inaccurate to some degree, what do people say? They say, you're coping. You just can't handle the truth. Oh, wow, it's bad for your candidate, so that must mean it's not real. All this and that, okay? So obviously that is true, but if you're willing to listen in good faith, here's the point I would make, which is yes, I think undeniably it is true that the election pre-candidate switch versus post-candidate switch, obviously much, much closer than it was, at the end when Joe Biden was just like rolling off the cliff, essentially. But with that said, okay, the trend you are seeing almost universally from the polls you've seen recently in regards to Kamala Harris is something we like to call a little bit of response bias. Now, of course, people will say that response bias is not real, but in many of these polls favoring Kamala Harris, you actually read into who's being sampled here. Very often what you're seeing is the amount of the electorate that identifies as liberal in some cases is going up like 10 to 15% overnight, right? So just like to throw out an example, let's say, for instance, that like 30% of America identifies as liberal, and then all of a sudden 40% the next day identifies as liberal. And it's like, oh, wow, look, now Kamala Harris is winning. So let's ask, of course, a reasonable question, which is the electorate in many of these crosstabs, as you're seeing, suddenly overnight becoming significantly more liberal? Right? Does that just happen? Like, does America become 10 to 15% more liberal overnight? Or is it more likely maybe that something is going on there with who is responding to these polls? And this gets into something that we call response bias, which, by the way, is not a new phenomenon. In the summertime before any general election is almost a universal cycle that we see that favors the Democrats. This happened in 2020. This happened in 2016. This even happened, I believe, 2012, 2008, like almost all of the elections going back before this, which is during the summertime before the election, the polls almost always show the Democrat candidate way out in front in regards to what they actually perform at. Okay. So again, this is not a new phenomenon. This is a historical trend. Sorry, I can't speak at this point. Been speaking for like 40 minutes straight. You know, we haven't done this for a while, but this is a historical trend that we've seen for a long time. Now, in this particular case of Kamala Harris, what likely drove this response bias? Well, I think the simple answer is that before the switch, right? There's no enthusiasm on the Democrat side. They were all demoralized. It is what it is. But suddenly, because of that bump in enthusiasm, now Democrats are excited in the honeymoon phase, right? They have a brand new candidate that when these pollsters call liberal-leaning people, to ask about the poll, or they mail it to them, or, text them, whatever it is, I think what you're oftentimes seeing is that the liberals, because of the current energy around Kamala Harris, are more likely to respond. And that's why you're seeing in some of these crosstabs that like the amount of liberals in the electorate it's just like shooting up for some reason. That's probably the reason why. But by the way, whatever reason this usually exists for Democrats, like I said, this is not a new phenomenon. And I'll give you the receipts with some examples here. So these are polling aggregates in the Rust Belt. So we're just talking particularly here about Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Okay, so keep that in mind. In 2020, at this time in 2020, the aggregate across those three states, Biden led by 5 points. Obviously, we know he did not win a single one of those states in the election by 5 points. In 2016, Hillary led in these states by an aggregate of 9 points. Again, this is like August 13th, 2020 or August 13th, 2016. And like I said, this response bias thing goes back way further than that. Now, what exactly drives that? I think we have a plausible explanation with Kamala Harris. I don't know what historically necessarily drives that. I don't know. Maybe, a lot of Democrat voters are like public school teachers, so they have the summertime off, or they're students or something. I don't know exactly what it is, but I'm just pointing out this is a well-documented historical trend, which is the summer Democrat response bias. You didn't really see it for Joe Biden prior. Maybe that's because Biden was just doing so historically bad. But arguably, I mean, it's plausible to say we may be seeing that for Kamala Harris. Of course, people are going to say that's coping. No, the electorate definitely did just go up 10 points overnight. That has nothing to do with response bias or the enthusiasm gap or who's responding to the poll because of the switch. No, you're just coping. That one poll that has Kamala like +8 in Michigan or something, was it Bloomberg or whatever? No, that's all real. It's like we can get into this game all day. Judge what I'm pointing out here for yourself. But what you're seeing in a lot of these polls is that Trump is not necessarily losing any ground. You're just seeing a shoot up of response for Kamala Harris, which is like, okay, I mean, that's a historical trend we usually see and usually does not actually come true. So with all of that, though, in mind, let's also look, again, factoring in, hey, maybe we're dealing with some response bias here in where we actually are. Honeymoon provided, response bias provided in the election. And this is the current decision desk average as of yesterday across the major swing states. So these are aggregates based on several different polls, right? So in Pennsylvania right now, Kamala Harris leads by 0.8 in the polls, 0.8, okay? In Arizona, Trump leads by 1.3. In Michigan, Harris leads by 1.8. In Nevada, Trump leads by 2.4. In Georgia, Trump leads by 2.6. And in Wisconsin, Harris leads by 3.2. So all the honeymoon and all of the drama stuff factored in, what does that show? It shows that we still have the Sun Belt states locked down, right? Trump's winning Arizona, Trump's winning Nevada, Trump's winning Georgia, but Harris is slightly ahead by a very tiny margin in those Rust Belt states, right? 0.8 in Pennsylvania, 1.8 in Michigan. And another thing I would also point out, and again, people are going to say this is cope, but let's do the cope both sides that way. So that, okay, let's do this objectively, right? Oh, I just bit my tooth. Let's do this objectively, right? Which is, okay, what I will say maybe for Trump is that in Nevada, we're leading by 2.4. You may say that's a lot. Nevada is a state where the polls historically do overestimate the Republican. So that is true. Okay, Nevada might be a lot closer. It does seem like we have the edge there, but maybe it's not as much of a lead as we think. But if you're going to concede that that's true and you're going to cope in the left-wing direction, I think it's also important to cope in the right-wing direction, which is when you hear Kamala Harris plus 3.2 in Wisconsin. Yeah. Remember the poll in 2020, I believe, that had Biden up like plus 17 in Wisconsin, right? And Wisconsin in the end, I think was decided by like less than 1 point or something like that. Very close state, right? So again, Nevada, a state that usually overestimates Republicans. Well, Wisconsin is a state that usually overestimates Democrats by a pretty decent margin. And that's something you've seen throughout the years. And so I think it's also plausible to say Harris 3.2 in Wisconsin, especially when Pennsylvania is only Harris 0.8, probably not all that accurate. People can say it's cope, but this is a known fact, right? This is a historical trend. It's always been true in Wisconsin. Those rural areas where a lot of the Republican voters live, the driftless area, all those different places, hard to sample, hard to poll. Wisconsin is notorious for this. This is nothing new. Maybe that suggests that the Wisconsin number there is a little bit out of left field. But that said, okay, again, current state of the election is everything given in mind, even the response bias. We're still winning in the Sun Belt, and of those Rust Belt states where we only need one to win, they're all within striking distance, right? They're all within margin of error. So does that suggest, yes, that we have work to do? We have ground to catch up. We got to make sure, everyone in those rural areas, let's say in the Rust Belt, is showing up to vote in maximum numbers. Yes, absolutely. Those are going to be close states. They were always going to be close states as long as it was Trump versus Kamala. But it also does not suggest that we are in some way catastrophically or irreparably underwater when it comes to those Rust Belt states. So again, those are the numbers here from the Decision Desk average. Pennsylvania, Harris 0.8, Arizona, Trump 1.3, Harris 1.8 in Michigan, Trump 2.4 in Nevada, Trump 2.6 in Georgia, and Wisconsin 3.2 for Harris. This is with response bias. Again, historical trend for Democrats in the summer. This is with the honeymoon phase and all that stuff. And still, what are the polls really showing at their core? They're showing Kamala Harris right now beating us slightly, but it's more than recoverable, right? So we got work to do. I'm not denying that. But, maybe not something that, especially given the historical trend on this in the summertime, maybe not something we should be super duper freaking out about just quite yet, right? Obviously, they're going to be close. Okay, so don't underestimate anything. Do not take anything for granted. But, that is something to consider. And the last few points here I'm going to make on the polling front is that, first of all, when you actually read into some of what these polls are actually reporting, one stat I've found very interesting is that Kamala Harris is not significantly increasing from Joe Biden's margins with Black voters, Hispanic voters, or young voters. And why is that important? Because obviously that is kind of the core base Democrat constituency. And while Kamala Harris in 2024 may do a better job than Biden was going to in 2024 in terms of turning out the Democrat base constituency, if she is not significantly outperforming them and she is not at least matching Joe Biden's 2020 numbers, then that potentially could leave her in trouble. Because think about this for a moment. In order to repeat Joe Biden's at least alleged 2020 victory margins, if she's only doing the same with Black voters, the same with young voters, the same with Hispanic voters, which, by the way, we'll talk about Hispanic voters in a second. She may actually be doing worse in that age demographic. And that means she would also have to match Joe Biden's 2020 margin, for instance, in a state like Michigan, a state like Pennsylvania, with the white working class, right? With white voters. And do you really believe Kamala Harris is going to do that? Like, use your logic for a second. Does it really seem like Kamala Harris is the type of candidate who can pull off what Scranton Joe managed to do to stop the bleeding with that demographic in 2020? Well, we'll address that in a second. But anyways, there's a new poll that came out. I believe this was a Fox News poll, but I saw some conservatives online kind of freaking out about it. because it showed that nationally, Kamala Harris was beating Donald Trump with Hispanic voters 58 to 42%, right? So about a 16-point lead there with Hispanic voters nationally. And some people were saying, that's not real, no way. But I thought to myself reading that, which is, even if that is real, again, 58 to 42 among Hispanics in favor of Kamala Harris, that is actually not bad at all, right? That actually suggests something good because, you got to keep in mind, if it's a national poll, it's including the Hispanics in New York and California. And we know that in both those states, New York and California, obviously they're going to skew that poll more to the left. So that said, the relevant question is not how Latinos in California are going to vote. It's how Latinos in Arizona and Nevada are going to vote. And if it's true that nationally speaking, Kamala Harris is only up 58 to 42% with Hispanic voters, then that kind of logically suggests that probably in a battleground state like Nevada, like Arizona, that vote split is probably much, much closer to around 50-50, right? 50% Trump, 50% Kamala. Maybe Kamala has a slight edge, but it's not by a whole lot. But why does that matter? Well, I look to the 2020 numbers. In 2020, Biden reportedly won, it's estimate because we don't know exactly, but Biden won between 65 to 75% of the Hispanic vote in the state of Arizona, okay? In 2020 in Nevada, Biden won between 55 to 65% in Nevada. And again, keep in mind, these were very close states, obviously, in 2020. So if it is true that Kamala Harris, let's say based on that poll, is probably somewhere around 50-50 with Hispanic voters in the battleground states, she loses Arizona, right? She loses Nevada unless she can pull off some type of miracle where she somehow gets like more white voters, right, to vote for her than voted for Joe Biden in 2020, which again, I don't think is very likely to happen. If she is getting those margins with Hispanics, then she's underwater, right? Arizona, Nevada, assuming those numbers, you can put in the Trump camp, and then we just have to focus on the Rust Belt. And in regards to the Rust Belt, big picture here, okay? Again, going back to the original premise here, if she is not increasing from Joe Biden's numbers with black voters, with young voters, and with Hispanic voters, and in some cases maybe even decreasing, then to recreate Joe Biden's very close 2020 election victory in the Rust Belt, we just talked about Arizona, Nevada, but talking now about the Rust Belt, she somehow, according to the fact that she's not increasing minority support, somehow would have to outperform 2020 Joe Biden with the white working class. And that, folks, may be the statistic that, assuming this election goes like, transparently or whatever it is, right? That may be the one statistic that dooms Kamala Harris in this election, is the white working class vote in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Because again, 2020, already, for a while now, that kind of union worker base of the Democrats has been peeling off, right? The white working class has been shifting over to the Republicans ever since Trump came down that escalator. But in 2020, the way that Biden allegedly kind of pulled that off is he dropped Trump's 2016 margins with the white working class a little bit because Biden was Scranton Joe, right? I'm from PA, even though I'm like, whatever, I'm white working class, all this stuff. Like, it was not even back then a very effective appeal, but allegedly, at least we know it was just effective enough, right, to get Joe Biden those states. But now we're with Kamala Harris, right? Kamala Harris has no appeal in the Rust Belt. She has no appeal with the white working class. And I don't think Tim Walz is necessarily going to save her, considering Tim Walz is not even from truly like the Rust Belt. He's more from Minnesota. It kind of is. It's kind of not, whatever. It's a weird state. Whatever you want to say about that, again, the challenge for Kamala Harris is if she's not increasing with the Democrat constituency the way she had hoped, you have to somehow win the white working class by a bigger margin than Biden. And if that doesn't happen, and it seems like that's basically something I would almost guarantee is impossible to happen, that is Donald Trump in the White House, right? So again, I don't say that to be complacent or just write off the polls as fake, right? Of course, people are going to say that. You're saying the polls are fake because they don't show your candidate doing well. No, I'm kind of breaking them down honestly and like looking into them, and I'm saying, okay, if with response bias factored in, with all this stuff factored in, she's not winning by a whole lot. In fact, compared to the 2020 and 2016 margins, both of which Trump overperformed by like 5 points or so, and Kamala Harris is not winning by nearly the same margins as 4 to 8 years ago, then, you know, it's not to say that that's what's going to happen. The same thing that happened in 2020 is going to happen in 2024 or 2016 or whatever, but it is to say that's not that bad, right? And then on top of that, the Hispanic margin in Arizona and Nevada, if that's underwater, and if the black and etc. young vote is underwater and Kamala is also underwater with white working class, then whatever you see from the number at the top of the polls, these demographic trends may suggest that, you know, Kamala Harris is in a little bit of trouble there. So that said, folks, there's sort of, I mean, how long have we been going live for? Almost an hour. So there's about sort of my hour-long monologue on the current state of the Trump campaign and where we are right now. So just to recap here, we addressed the ground game, we addressed the polls, we addressed the advertising, we addressed the rallies, the assassination attempt, whatever. I think the final conclusion, as I said at the beginning here, is this. Is there reason for concern? Once again, I say yes, okay? People love to straw man this stuff. They love to say, so you're saying everything is fine. No, not saying that. You're saying that we should get complacent. No, not saying that. But I'm just also not saying that, like, we should be panicked or convinced we're going to lose, okay? Plenty of room to work with here. Plenty of time to work with. And yes, some numbers, response bias factored in, but still, some numbers may not seem that favorable to us. But I also pointed out some numbers that are, which suggests what? It's a close election. We don't want to panic. We just got to have, like, this nervous confidence where we just get it done, make sure we have the turnout that we need. Again, I think that's going to decide the election. And there is essentially the verdict on it. So that said, folks, I'll read chat here maybe for like 10 to 15 minutes and then we'll call it a night. So if you are enjoying the stream, if you have thoughts on anything that I said here tonight, feel free to do so via the super chats, the member chat. I'll read a little bit from the live regular chat as well. But if you would like to guarantee that that I do read your chat, feel free to do so via the super chats. And yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear overall the audience feedback on this. So that said, let us get into this. Sebastian became a member. I appreciate that very much, Sebastian. Let me see here. My thing is broke. Oh, what is going on with my chat right now? Okay. I don't know why that just scrolled all the way down there for absolutely no reason. JT, thank you very much, says, good and informative overview, Vince. Thank you. I appreciate the compliment there, JT. It's like, look, again, I will reiterate, right? Not saying that, oh my gosh, everything's fine, but you are hearing a lot, you know, and I think also, last thing I'll say actually is, I'm not saying that what certain people saying is not true, right? The motives does not necessarily determine whether or not what they're saying is factually true, but it is important to keep in mind that many of the people spreading the most concerns about the Trump campaign online are, to a degree, right, like anti-Trump demoralization agents, right? Because who are you hearing this a lot from? You have a lot of former DeSantis influencers, former DeSantis supporters who are basically trying to do this all as a gotcha to say, look, you should have chosen our guy instead. And it's like, okay, you know, again, it doesn't mean that their concerns are not true when it comes to this election, but at the same time, keep in mind the source, right? Keep in mind the source. Like, to some degree, they're kind of just bitter that you didn't choose their guy, so of course they're going to kind of have a bias to be, you know, freaking out about Trump. In some cases, it's just straight up the media, right? You have to also keep in mind, we are dealing with the most, like, propaganda, most strong media psyop of any presidential candidate in history right now, right? The propaganda campaign you've seen for Kamala Harris truly is historic. And yes, 2020 Biden, 2016 Hillary, it was pretty bad, but this is by far like the most biased and the most, like, just propagandistic that the media has been in the history of American politics. And so that said, that's also to say that it doesn't necessarily mean the mainstream media is wrong about this election, because we're not going to know until election day. But it's also important to keep in mind, they are demoralization agents, right? They have a vested interest in Trump not winning, and they want the Trump base to be as demoralized as possible. They want the Kamala Harris base to be as energized as possible. So that's sort of entity number 2. And then entity number 3, who is spreading a lot of this demoralization, it's just straight up like anti-Trumpers, right? It's like people who like just they're right leaning or whatever, but they never really supported Trump, never really fond of the guy, and they're just kind of keeping up with what they've been along doing like this entire time. So, just important to keep in mind, right? Keep in mind the source of where you're hearing this stuff from. All right. And maybe that applies for me too, right? I mean, I'm like more pro-Trump, so I'm going to give you a more pro-Trump perspective here. Now, I tried to keep it as objective as possible, read you the numbers, read you the data, all this stuff. But yeah, obviously to some degree, I have a bias in this as well. Yes, part of me is kind of like, well, look, Trump just took a bullet a month ago. He has been in this game 3 times. To some degree, I'm going to trust the plan a little bit. And to the degree that I don't, it's like, what are you really going to do, right? I think ultimately, I'm not Trump. I'm not the man in the arena making those decisions. And then even further than that, I mean, I think ultimately it's in God's hands to some degree, right? And I didn't really go into that because it's like, that's not really tangible evidence I can tell to people. But yeah, like me personally, honestly, part of me has the gut instinct that, like, when Trump survived the assassination attempt a month ago, like, I kind of have, part of me wants to just have a feeling that, like, yeah, it's destiny. Like, God spared him for a reason. He's supposed to be here. He's supposed to be in the story. And like, that's like, it's going to happen, but obviously I don't speak for the man upstairs, nor do I know that for sure, nor is that really like something you can use to convince people because it's just pure speculation. So I don't go into that, but I will point that out to acknowledge, yes, maybe I'm a little biased in the Trump direction. So maybe, I'll defend the current state of the campaign a little more than some people, but this is all to say, if you're trying to get the honest answer, again, just consider the source, right? Consider who you're hearing it from. And, obviously it doesn't mean that what so-and-so is saying is not true, but everyone has their bias, including me. So that is something certainly to keep in mind. So, all right, folks, I'll end the stream here probably about 10:15 p.m. Eastern time. So last call, if you got any super chats, got any thoughts, feel free to send them in and do so. Your support, of course, is greatly appreciated. But let's see what we got else going on also in the live chat. So Joe Bond News says, who should be Vivek's VP in 2028? Hot take, I don't know who I want to be the main ticket candidate yet in 2028. It's 4 years away. Like, first of all, let's focus on winning this election, but even furthermore than that, I'm not saying that as like a cope or like a get out. I'm saying that genuinely because I don't know yet who exactly I want to be the Republican nominee. I think Vivek is a strong contender maybe for that slot. I like JD Vance more than maybe some other people do. I also think if Trump wins, he will be the front runner. It doesn't guarantee him to win the nomination, but he'll be the front runner for sure. And there's other people. Who knows who tosses their hat in the race, right? Like, who knows? I don't know. Maybe Tucker Carlson magically decides he wants to run. Probably not, but it's just something to consider. So I'm not going to make a comment on that because I don't know yet, right? Let's win this election first, then maybe we can start talking about 2028. But really, I'm not really interested in even deciding who I'm going to endorse for 2028 until at least after the 2026 midterms, but maybe even after that. So, it's over. Dems win. Enough coping, says Empire DNW. Well, if you're going to just completely disregard everything that I, said in this stream and all the numbers I laid out, then that's on you, man. Like, ultimately, like, that's your choice, okay? You can have your own feelings about it. You're obviously entitled to believe what you want to believe. I laid you out the numbers. I laid you out the historical trends when it comes to polling response bias for Democrats. But if you want to write them off, then I don't know. We'll see what happens, I guess, on election day, right? Because you know what? Here's the thing. Is like, I'll go on the record right now and say it's going to be a close election. So I kind of have plausible deniability. It's like either way, whatever happens, I don't know what's going to happen. But for the people currently saying right now, like, it's over, Democrats are going to win. Okay, then if Trump does win on November 5th, we're putting you in the compilation. Okay, so I hope you're ready for that. I hope you're ready for the Trump has no chance. He's screwed. He doesn't know what he's doing. Blah, blah, blah. He's going to lose. I'm not going to vote for him. And then he wins. Okay, you're going to be part of the 2016 style edits. So I just want you to keep that in mind. Okay, so you know that's the issue I think I have. Did you see Destiny's focus group? He did a focus group. That's probably more like a struggle session, but Richard Yellowhawk says he's pathetic. He's avoiding talking about his own candidate because of the bad state of the economy in relation to the global market. Okay, I didn't see that. I guess I'll have to go check it out. You know, I don't really watch Destiny basically ever. The only reason I know about the things he says is because people talk about it on Twitter and stuff. But you know, I'll have to kind of check in on that. Leo Rogers says, what topic do you think Trump should focus on to win this election? Easy. And by the way, it's already the topics that the primary focus of the ads has been. Number one is immigration. Undeniably, okay? That is the issue that Trump has the biggest lead over Kamala Harris on. You know, there it is, right? It's immigration. By the way, she was the border czar. You know, she keeps trying to run from that. We know, right? We know is immigration. Number two, maybe this is, you know, I know Richard Barris, for instance, disagrees with this, but I think this is important, is crime, right? I think Kamala Harris, especially, Joe Biden, yes, but Kamala Harris especially is sort of the figurehead of like the progressive, radical, you know, soft on crime movement. So I would say crime. And of course, number three is the economy, obviously, right? Like people can't afford to live. Children don't have a future when it comes to the housing market. That's a bread and butter issue. And, you know, I think that'll definitely be a factor, especially with the recent market crash and wherever that goes, that will also favor Trump in the election. By the way, on that front, one more thing I wanted to point out is I saw a poll. I believe this is from University of Michigan, if I'm not mistaken, but there was a poll that came out this week that said that, and I remember the exact number here. It said Kamala Harris leads Donald Trump on the economy 42 to 41%. So, of course, people can say, oh, you're coping. You just don't think that's real. The Democrats are so good on the economy. It's like, okay, you know, if you believe that, then there's no, like, getting through to you. But for anyone who suggests that maybe, no, I don't think that's really accurate. No, actually, abortion maybe, you know, stuff like that. But I seriously doubt that Democrats actually have a lead over Trump when it comes to the economy. Well, that's something to keep in mind, is like, when in regards to the rest of these polls and response bias and all that stuff and the sample bias and all of that, it's like, should we necessarily believe a poll that has Kamala beating Trump on the economy? Well, when you read into it, again, 42 to 40% was the lead. I have the numbers here memorized because I looked at this kind of very carefully. So this poll since like, I should get a drawing board. You know, that's what I really need. I need like a whiteboard right here, right? Because look at like these notes, okay? My handwriting's pretty terrible, and then I just scribbled all over here to like screw around. But it's kind of worth noting here, right? So let's do it this way, okay? So, see that? Okay, you can't even see it. Whatever. So again, August poll is Harris leads Trump on the economy 42 to 41%. You may be asking, where does that number come from? Well, first of all, it's important to point out, I believe here, I have it somewhere in my Twitter if you want to actually look at the screenshots. First of all is the sample, right? I think this poll sampled like 46% Democrats and 41% Republicans. So literally it sampled more Democrats than Republicans. So obviously, you know, what do you think? But even then, you know, on top of that, Trump did not actually go down at all in the economy. In the last poll before this was like 41-35. Trump led Biden 41% to 35% on the economy. And before that was something similar. So what does that show, right? It's like Trump is not losing. And this is what this poll is showing. The poll that the Democrats are celebrating. Trump did not lose. You can't even see what I'm writing here. Okay. Whatever. You can kind of see it, I guess. Trump's support on the economy has gone the same, right? It was 41% here. It's still 41% here. But Biden was down here, whatever. There were a bunch of people that said neither was good for the economy. And then suddenly the support for Kamala Harris of like the undecided people magically shoots up here in this next poll to 42%. So what does that show? Probably, most likely, it shows that, first of all, the sample, again, like I said, you're sampling more Democrats than Republicans. Okay. So, that's number one, obviously. But number two is that, yes, there's an enthusiasm jump, right? Yes. The people who were not enthusiastic about Biden, but liberal leaning, yes, they jumped up, and that's why Kamala Harris went up like 7 points in the poll on the economy. But notice, because for people who want to say it's Trump's fault, he's running the campaign poorly, notice from this poll, it's had Trump at like 41% the entire year, right? So Trump has not lost literally any ground. It's just that the enthusiasm jumped up for Kamala Harris, and because the sample here is a bit skewed and the response here is a bit skewed, suddenly Kamala's leading Trump on the economy by 1 point, okay? So that's something to consider, I think, in my opinion. And if you disagree, if you seriously think, no, I actually think in real America, the American public favors Kamala Harris on the economy than Trump, then whatever. We can't have that debate. But if you look at that and say that, yeah, that number doesn't sound super believable to me, and you understand that this is a very similar trend that is happening with all of the polls, right? Trump is not really losing support. It's just that the enthusiasm for Democrats, the response, again, the response bias, response from Democrats is like shooting up because of, the honeymoon phase. Then, it suggests like, yeah, it's a close election now, obviously, but it's not like the Trump campaign is imploding or collapsing. Because if that were happening again, you would think 41% the entire year for Trump on the economy. You would think if it was the Trump campaign that was collapsing, shouldn't that number go down? But it didn't go down. It stayed at exactly 41%. But the enthusiasm again here just jumping up. So what does that show? It shows turnout's going to be everything. We have to match their enthusiasm, all that stuff, obviously. But at the same time, should you be completely freaked out over the current polls? Not necessarily, because this has to do with response and like sampling issues, right? If you want to believe that. So, that's just something to keep in mind there. Brandon Crespin sends a member chat for 7 months. Thank you very much. Says, I know not to trust polls, but I'm still very worried right now nonetheless. And I think that's valid. Yeah, you should be worried. Like I said, we should be worried. We should be concerned. But there's a difference between doing that and panicking, right? My point here is not to panic, okay? It's going to be close, all right? I'm not going into the election. Honestly, if I can say this honestly now because, he's out of the race. When it was Trump versus Biden, I was like, I really thought, honestly, that not only would we repeat the 2016 map, I thought we had a legitimate shot of winning Virginia and maybe even New Mexico. I'm just, now that it's over, I will say that. Now those are off the table, in my opinion, right? Maybe an outside shot of Virginia if a miracle happens, but whatever. So, obviously now it's very close. And then, yeah, I'm kind of more concerned. I definitely am on the edge of my seat. We all should be on the edge of our seats for this election. But still, to write it off or to just be like, oh, we're going to lose. No, dooming. No dooming. Okay, demoralization is exactly what they want. Like I said, we are in the middle of the most coordinated media propaganda campaign psyop for any candidate in the history of the United States. So that in mind, maybe think for a second, right? They want us to be demoralized. Maybe we shouldn't follow their lead on that. Right? And maybe there's almost a reason why they're spreading so much demoralization propaganda, because maybe privately they know, hey, we're not really as confident as we think. Actually, David Axelrod went on CNN last week and admitted that. He literally said quietly, because he's a Democrat strategist, he said quietly, Kamala's campaign internal polls are not nearly what the public ones are. And it's a close election, but we're actually finding internally Trump still is winning a very close election. So, just all things to keep in mind. It's going to be a close election, okay? Don't be surprised if it is decided by like a 200-something electoral vote margin instead of 300 like we've seen the last few times. I think that is, completely possible. Completely possible. So, again, folks, last call here for super chats. Feel free to send any. Let me make sure I did not miss any here. But let's see. Donald Williams says Trump needs to show he will not start war with Iran. Okay, I think I know exactly where you're coming from, Donald Williams, but I think, the whole Trump base agrees that we don't want war with Iran, and, I opposed that back in 2020, but it's kind of dishonest, frankly, to say that, like, there's a legitimate fear right now that Trump's going to go to war with Iran. Trump's entire campaign platform, he's been saying it since like 2022, is the wars wouldn't have happened, right? He's going to bring a peace to all the wars. And so, and even on the Twitter space last night, he said he doesn't want war with Iran. Like, literally, he said that publicly out loud. So, I think I know, like, where you're hearing that from, let me just say. But that's honestly a pretty bad faith talking point, like, straight up. Like, that is not something that Trump is campaigning on, or, really has ever campaigned on, regardless of, oh, but he said this one thing after they allegedly tried to assassinate him. It's like, okay. Does anyone really believe that, like, okay, Trump's top priority is war with Iran? Like, I don't actually believe that. I don't actually believe that, So, let's see. Trump also needs to aim for more white voters. That part is true. That part is true. White working class voters in the Rust Belt are going to decide this election. Kamala Harris has an inherent disadvantage with them. He needs to go after that. He needs to go after that hard, right? So, let's see. It's weird because Trump might be losing in some of the polls about the economy, but he's leading in a poll by about 9 points that asked which candidate would be better for their personal finances. Yeah. That's why, to some degree, like, I'm not a believer that, like, polls have no validity. Like, obviously, there's some degree of science and stuff that goes behind them, assuming that's conducted properly. But you also have to consider, like, the biases that go into this poll. And again, if Trump's been at 41% the whole year, and then Kamala magically bumps up the undecided voters, it's like, I don't know. That to me suggests it's like an enthusiasm gap, The reason we voted for Trump 2016 is anti-war policy. I totally agree. I totally agree. And he's hammered that home. He's really hammered that home. Big, obviously, on the Ukraine conflict, but even on the Israel thing, right? Like, he has kind of contacted both Netanyahu and the leader, I believe, of the Palestinian Authority, right? He wants a peace deal there. He basically told Israel, like, hey, get the war done fast, right? He did that. And then obviously, like, he posted that he was talking about both sides. And his big talking point here is, like, the war wouldn't have happened. So, like, honestly, again, like, people can, like, say this or, like, oh, Trump is too big on Israel or whatever. But the reality is, I don't think that Trump's going to go to war with Iran. And I don't see any evidence that is suggesting that he will, right? If anything, I think you're at way more risk to go to war with Iran under Biden right now, because of the fact mainly that, like, he's not really stepping in to mediate the situation, and, like, Netanyahu's not listening to him. Iran's not listening to him, obviously. They keep, going back and forth with each other, and he's just sitting there like an idiot, right? And I think to some degree, it's probably true that, like, okay, the more that Israel and Iran escalate, then they're trying to bait us into war and all this stuff. But it was never really a concern with Trump. And I don't even know where this talking point is, coming from, honestly. So whether or not you have faith he will win is irrelevant. Some fights are worth fighting for their own sake. Yes, absolutely true. Absolutely true. So let's see what else is going on here. Cultural and spiritual war going on right now. Absolutely. That's absolutely true. Let's see here. People talking about leaving America. I have no plans to leave America unless I get run out of the country like Edward Snowden. I don't know if anyone's ever thought of this, okay? It's like, if you had to seek asylum in another country, where would you go? And I think the two answers, like, when you really break it down, I've thought about this before, actually, because it's just fun to think about. I don't want to go to China. I certainly don't want to go to North Korea. So of a lot of the country, and I don't want to go to like Venezuela or something, right? Or Cuba. So although Cuba, I mean, I guess the weather's nice, but like fleeing America as like a right winger, probably not going to do the best with seeking asylum in Cuba. So I think honestly, I believe Argentina still does not have an extradition treaty with the United States. And then there's like where Snowden went, obviously, which is like Russia, right? So I think those are your two options if you have to flee for asylum, is Argentina or Russia. I don't know. You can let me know where you would go. But besides that, probably would not leave the United States unless I had to, like in fear of my life, honestly. Switzerland? I'm pretty sure Switzerland has a extradition treaty though, right? I don't know. All right, that's it, folks. Let me do last call for any super chats here, and then I will wrap up the stream right now. So, folks, someone's asking, when's your next stream? I'm not exactly sure on a schedule yet. Part of me was thinking every Sunday, so we can do like a Sunday wrap-up, a Sunday recap. But obviously, like during the week, in terms of prime time, is the best with the news. So I don't know. It's either going to be like maybe like Tuesdays and Thursdays or something like that, or it's going to be every Sunday. I'll figure it out. I'll let you guys know. Just be sure you have the notifications on so, you know, you're able to see. Maybe we do like a weekly show or something where I break down more news and go through the headlines or all of that stuff. So I don't know. But that said, okay, if we got no more super chats, folks, thank you to everyone who tuned in. Again, we will be doing these lives more often. Okay, I don't have a schedule figured out yet. This is kind of just like a pilot, but more often between now and the election, at least once a week, if not twice a week is the goal. So stay posted. I'll let you know when they actually have the schedule out and stuff for myself. But all right, that said, be sure to leave a like on this stream. Let's get this stream to 200 likes before we go. Subscribe if you're new. Thanks for supporting. And until next time, have a very great rest of your night. God bless and peace. All right, see you guys later. Play the outro. Where's the outro? There's the outro.